sit down. I'm Brian Drake. I have just assumed a new role as the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning in our Future Capabilities and Innovation Office. This is a project that we have inherited into our office, but it's one I did in my prior life as a branch chief in the Americas Regional Center. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this project is, what it is not, and where we're going into the future. So anybody's guess, how many drug overdoses are there a year? $250,000?
Oh, U.S. or worldwide?
U.S. U.S. only. $250,000? What else? 50,000? 40,000? Do I have 20,000? That's not. So we lose about 70,000 people a year to drug overdoses in 2017. Of that, we lost 28,000 people to synthetic opioids. Synthetic opioids, mostly known as like fentanyl or Oxycontin, Percocet. These are some of the prescription names of those drugs. Those are legal, and they are provided by professionals in a medical setting for mostly anesthesia. Okay. It is a preferred drug for folks that are doing some fairly routine surgeries, but they've kind of transitioned into a heavily abused drug. And we've lost some people that are quite famous. Tom Petty died from a fentanyl overdose. Prince died from a fentanyl overdose. But it kills 28,000 Americans every year. So if you can visualize that, that's like every other day an airliner falling right out of the sky. So it's pretty bad. It's been declared a national healthcare crisis by the president. And it's a mission that we care a lot about, we try to address. So why DIA? DIA has been fighting the drug war for about 40 years. We are the principal intelligence support element to the Pentagon for a lot of different pieces. We do military support intelligence. We do work on the flow of drugs, which is what my prior office does. So where do drugs get produced and where do they go? It's a lot of information, it's a lot of data. So we run a couple of technical programs, one of them is SABLE SPEAR, another one we run is called the Consolidated Counter-Drug Database. That database collects information about drug movements worldwide, and we use that information in order to assess where drugs are coming from, where they're manufactured, where they deliver, and so forth. We get all that information in thousands and thousands of entries, and so we pay a fairly significant size of our analytic workforce and counter-drug mission to go through that data and answer requests for information. Some things as pedestrian as, here's how much cocaine is coming from South America to the United States. Some of it's more exquisite, things like how much methamphetamine is produced worldwide. Those are tough questions to answer. And so we dedicate quite a few people to answer them. So when we were confronted with the opioid crisis, we had a question. How are we supposed to answer a question about something like a synthetic drug, which is incredibly difficult to track and incredibly difficult to understand where areas of production might be? So if you're growing cocaine, there's only a couple of places in the world you can grow cocaine that's an organic drug. So Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. We know that. We can estimate those production numbers because we have lots of data that comes over a long period of time. And there's only so much land mass that is arable for cocaine. So we can estimate that. We can understand the numerator and the denominator. When we start talking about synthetic drugs, things like methamphetamine and fentanyl, we can't understand the denominator because it can be produced anywhere on the planet. It can be produced in any quantity we need. So how do you estimate a drug marketplace where you don't have the primary mathematics in order to estimate that? So that's where SABLE SPEAR was born. So SABLE SPEAR is an artificial intelligence machine learning environment where we collect mass data and we then throw that against an intelligence question, and from that intelligence question, we derive some insight from it. So from SABLE SPEAR, and I'm just going to hit a couple of things that we ingest. We take about 43 million different websites, about 8 million different bills of lading. This is air and overseas, and about 1 million satellite images. Now we have other data sets that we include in there. There's about 20 different ones. From those different data sets, we correlate and crush that all into one understanding of that problem. So when we start talking about things like satellite images need addresses, geolocations, right? Well, addresses aren't just sitting out anywhere. You have to have something that informs you of that. That's where those 43 million websites come into play. So we look through all those websites. We then extract things like emails, phone numbers, physical addresses, business records. From that information, we then correlate that against those images and then say, yep, that's a place on the planet that produces fentanyl. We know that because open sources tell us that that place exists. And what that does for us is when we have things like geospatial imagery that we're crushing down against that information, it's telling us things like, that is an actual place on the planet. It's not an empty field. If it's an empty field, what do you think that tells us? Anybody know anybody? Go ahead.
Underground.
Underground? Good guess. Imagery. You've worked in the government. It's probably a pretty strong indicator of denial of deception, whether it's an underground installation or it is, they're trying to hide it, right? If you're a business that's trying to sell a pharmaceutical good, a quite lucrative one, by the way, then I want to be found. I want to sell it. I want to make that happen. If I'm doing it illegally, I don't want to be found at all. And I'm going to ingest denial and deception into any data set where that might be. Now, it could be from business records. It can be from putting a wrong address in, whatever it ends up being. But that's what SABLE SPEAR does. SABLE SPEAR starts to correlate that data, crush that data down, and start to find anomalies. And then it makes a judgment based on the data model that our analysts developed about what constitutes illegal and legal activity. The thing that makes it compelling for me is that I wasn't sure if this thing was going to work. No idea. So what I did is I took a portion of my staff and I dedicated them to examine the same intelligence question we were going to task to the vendor. And in this case, it was locations of fentanyl production in China. So they looked at that problem for about a year. And from that, they were able to pull forward thousands and thousands of entries of places we saw producing fentanyl, and then took data and correlated that. Great. Took about 6 FTEs, different personalities over that time, and took us a full year. In 4 months, our vendor was able to do the same task and provide degrees of fidelity that we couldn't have anticipated. So in that period of time, we had a 100% increase in the number of companies that we identified. We had a 400% increase in the number of people we identified in those networks, and a 900% increase in the number of illicit activities we identified. Now, for us, that's a big deal, because if we were not catching that many illicit activities, we weren't doing something right. So the machine actually tipped us into those ideas. So from all that, we took those results and compared that against the traditional way we produce intelligence, found that there was some validity there, primarily because what they found for illicit companies was identical for what we found for illicit companies. So their methodology for identifying those folks was pretty good, and it was nearly the same as our own. And then they found the illicit ones using selectors that we weren't thinking about. So for example, if you're a web developer, I'm looking at Living Creek more in front of me. If you're a web developer and you want to create 5 or 6 different sites and for 5 or 6 different customers, do you recreate each of them? Every line of code, every piece of HTML? What do? Copy and paste. Turns out that web developers around the world are generally pretty lazy. So what that does for us is it provides what I'd call tool marks between every website. So if I find an illegal website that's been coded in a particular way, it'll have the idiosyncrasies that every developer puts in because they're copying and pasting in every place, right? And it will be unique because that web developer probably is maybe using open source code, but it's the combination of what they're using to create that site that will be unique. That provides us with those tool marks to say, you know what, you think these 5 sites are 5 separate sites? They're actually all part of the same nefarious network, right? And they're going through 43 million of these. 43 million. We could dedicate the entire workforce in the defense intelligence enterprise, we would never identify that kind of stuff. Why? Because it's such a weak signal in the noise that we wouldn't know to look for it, nor can we have the human capacity to actually go through it. So this kind of problem begs for an AI type solution. So with that, where are we going into the future of this environment? So we see a lot of value in trying to understand supply chains. So obviously this is a piece that director talks about this quite a bit. His context is more about how do we do the supply chain for JWICs and that sort of thing. Those are all valuable questions. There are probably other applications that are useful here. What we're trying to do is test different applications of artificial intelligence and different mission problems. I think the problem that we've had traditionally is that we take a solution, we try to jam it into a mission. We're reversing that model. We're going to take the mission first and then see what kind of capabilities are out and available. So in my new job, we're more like a venture capital outfit. We are looking for opportunities, both contractual and with vendors providing unique capabilities, and we want to apply those capabilities to a specific mission problem. So what I will be in the business of is generating problems. What I learned a long time ago is that solution development is really hard. So now all I'm going to do is generate problems. I think that is right? This job security and doing Linwood degrees, that's all he does, is generate problems. His are a little different, but yeah. So that's what I'm gonna do. No, seriously, that's the idea. We want to identify a problem, we want to understand what the particulars of that problem are, unpackage it, and then to see whether or not AI is appropriate for doing that sort of thing. So I think that may be one of the other challenges I'm encountering, is a lot of folks come to us and say, I want to be able to do this with AI. Well, this with AI is usually like going after a fly with a bazooka. It's just not an appropriate application of the tech. But so we want to be able to steer it more toward, yep, that makes sense to use it in that context. And we'll provide lots of reasons why. So, like I was saying, I think contracting and agility is probably an endemic problem across the government. But for us, we're trying to find ways to make that pain a lot less. So we're always interested in talking to folks who have partnerships with other agencies that can provide venues for doing classified or unclassified work. We're interested in finding details out about what kind of work that is, how can it be approved and applied to our environments, be that SIPR or JWICS or just the never know. So I'm excited to have lots of conversations in that regard. So the other part that we're doing is we're taking a risk-informed approach to looking at AI/ML. So I think traditionally we've looked at this environment by just saying, we're just going to try and do it, see what happens. Well, that usually locks us into a contract action. It takes about a year, right? And by the year is over, we figure out, that didn't work out. That's a lot of time and effort and money that we shouldn't be wasting. So what we're trying to enable is a fail-fast type model. So if we identify, hey, we've got an investment here that's low risk and high return, we'll do it. We're going to do it immediately. No question about it. Making that business case to those who oversee the money, that's probably the easy part. The things that are harder are going to be high risk, high return type things, right? So being able to identify the totality of a particular nation's military laydown and high degrees of fidelity in that, right? High risk, high return, because it's a key mission of the agency. So how do we enable those things? How do we identify those opportunities? That's the job of our office, is to start to say, with the seed capital we get from mission, we're going to put that into this solution, and we believe that result will be here. That result will be measured in a metrics program that we apply to that. So when we say, here's a common one that we're doing right now. I've got a problem that I address for the Secretary of Defense. That question takes about 10 FTE, and they turn it every month. 10 people to do that. If a solution came in to fix that problem that came under 10 FTE, that's a win. And it probably is achievable, very easily achievable. Right? So those are the kinds of metrics we look for. It's faster, it's better, it's cheaper, let's do it. That's the purpose of our office. Okay, with that, so we just wrapped it all up in 15 minutes. Very excited, we have a full hour. So either it's Miller time, or I'll take your questions. Yes, sir.
Who are the vendors or vendor that you've been working closest with?
Closest with? Does this work? Does this work? Okay, good. Closest with. So the first iteration of this project came through a company called Rhombus Power. They're a small business out in Palo Alto. That was for SABLE SPEAR. We have a couple of other different projects that are AI/ML focused, and there's a variety of different vendors associated with that.
I've been proposing a concept of a data science proving ground, aka Kaggle, copy, Control-C, paste. So you present the data and you say, whoever does best against this wins the prize. You get the contract. I mean, how do we expose it so it's not, yeah, sure, I can do that. Give me a 1-year contract and I'll do it for you. How about, here's the data. We withhold our test set. You work it out, get your model, throw the model over to us, and we'll judge it and
Oh, that's interesting. So our approach to that is we're going to use probably more other transactional authorities in order to look at those sorts of things, because it allows us to test a particular vendor and then say, hey, it's not working out, sorry. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. There are other vehicles that allow us to do that sort of thing.
Maybe more like on a DAA kind of thing?
It could be. So this example, SABLE SPEAR, came through us through the Netopedia process, and if anyone hasn't seen the Netopedia list, I commend you to do it. We update that on a fairly regular basis. And in those listings, that's just basically, this is what the agency is interested in trying to do, partner up with industry. So that is a IDIQ that allows us to do, it's a BAA, so it allows us to do 1 year of work just to test it and see how it works. Sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes we literally don't know what we need. So sometimes an OTA is better for that. Yes, sir.
Thanks. That's one. I want to know how your program interfaces with civilian and law enforcement agencies. Like, do you support, like, do you take your output and like all of these different addresses for people wanting to do illegal things, and then you give that to a specific contact in like DHS? And also, are you able to use data that they have in their databases to submit to you? It's across agency.
Yeah, I thought I could away with a yes answer on that. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, we work very closely with the FBI, DHS, CBP, all those folks, DEA. We tip to them things that cross into their threshold. So when it's domestic nexus, that's when we pass it over. Or if there's a joint investigation we're working with together. Quite honestly, we're turning out so many targets, we cannot action them. And I think part of it is that we lack a strategic approach to the crisis. So, this is just my opinion, but one of the issues that I encounter is that law enforcement folks will say, hey, I can charge this guy now. He may be the lowest guy in the totem pole, but I can charge him now. And I can put him away for 20 years. Spectacular. But why don't we try to work that up a little higher and figure out who else he's working for, where he's getting his supply. That is generally not the optic. Generally, the optic is, I can action now, let's do it. So where DIA plays a more productive role is providing that strategic insight to say, I could tell you, you could get the same win, get somebody higher up the totem pole, and probably get deeper charges on them, right? And the thing that's really cool about the SABLE SPEAR approach, and I'm a little biased, but what I think is really cool is that I can take nefarious information from different sources and I can add that to the charging paperwork. So if you say, I've got a guy on fentanyl, that's great. I also see him brokering in fake passports. Well, that's an issue. Child pornography, we're done. That's all I pass over, we're done. We've done that for 3 or 4 different instances. So we didn't pass drug charges, we passed child pornography charges. And by doing that, I mean, this is all sitting on the internet. Nobody's hiding it. They want to be found, they just don't want to be found by us, right? So when we find them, and then we put the screws to them, we found out some interesting things. And then your other question was?
How they do get their data, like, because you said it all, there's an open source, do you need police data, or?
We'd love to have police data. What ends up happening is that there's some data sources that we can take without question. Some other ones require some controls. So, for example, we use Food and Drug Administration information to tell us about the illicit side. It's important to define the negative. So we know that these companies are legally permitted to sell narcotics to the United States and other things. People sell, plastics and all sorts of things in China, but we only care about the opioid side of that question. So we asked the FDA to provide that. We had some rules around it, so that data by itself is actually not shareable because it provides information that is could be used for stock trades, that sort of thing, insider knowledge. So we have to protect that data separately and only to the people that are authorized to do it. And so we have to follow legal structures to do that. And we work with our OGC to do that. Yep.
So earlier, directors actually said when we implement these scripts or AI machine learning, we still have to describe liability and trade craft statements, right? And you talked about how this is taking templates or copies of code and finding others. I know as a person that's in development, we do copy stuff. So how do you describe and make sure that you're aligning with like uncertainty and accuracy for this type of thing and going forward with all the AI projects that you're going to go for? How do you make sure that you
So I will fully admit, we are still building the plane in flight. But what I will say is that we have written into the contract that for how data correlations are drawn and how they surface to us, they have to be tradecraft compliant, and that is dependent on us to approve with the research director's office in the DI. So when they're happy, we're happy. We kind of front-loaded this a bit because we built the model. So we said this is the thing we need to see happen, and we are somewhat validating that with government data from other sources. So if we got close, if they got close to what we have assessed, all right, probably pretty good. Doesn't mean that's game. We still have to go through validation of that. So one of the asks of the vendors that we have to do business with is that we get to look under the hood, which sometimes involves proprietary data. And I'll just be very direct. I think if we had a vendor that came to us and said, well, I can't tell you that because it's proprietary, and that's the answer, then we will not be doing business with that particular vendor, unfortunately.
Of the 43 million websites, what's the breakdown like of the
So for the open, it's 43 million.
you also do other sites?
There are lots of sources included in SABLE SPEAR.
So not Tor.
There are lots of sources included in SABLE SPEAR.
Are you using outside tools like Plus or can you run the analytics file? Can you speak a little bit about development?
Yes, so all of this is being done in the commercial environment on AWS. Well, it's AWS, Azure, and the Google Cloud. So I thought it was actually kind of clever, and it's something to think about for our future novels, is that the data is replicated in each of those clouds. And so the question we sometimes get is like, okay, so you have this data source, how do you know that data source is not corrupted? Well, because we have it replicated in 3 different places. And so if something were to happen to one of them, it alerts us, number one. Number two, it means that I now have to rethink about what data I'm pulling from because I know one of them might be corrupted. Doesn't mean it is, we have a validation step behind all that. And so now you have a layered security approach to how you look at that data. We have not intentionally looked at ways to move this into SIPR or JWICs. And the reason is twofold. One is that we have to have reach to the law enforcement partners, right? And second parties, third parties, all the way down. If I have the ability to take to the Chinese government, here's how I know you guys aren't enforcing fentanyl regulations. Great, that's good. Because now at least we're having an honest conversation about what we know and what they know, right? If I had to produce, and we have had to produce products for our customers that are classified, poke your eyes out, well, that's not helpful. How am I supposed to take that to a negotiation with the Chinese and broker with them honestly? So that's the idea. The other part of that is that the second I divorce those data sets from the NIPRNet, I've lost half its value because it's changing all the time. The value to me as a manager of analysts is that SABLE SPEAR never sleeps. It's going all the time. So anytime there's a change in target aspect, I know it. I know it. And I can then drill down to, hey, this is what has happened, and I can do alerts based on that, if it's worthy of a customer to read. In a model that's more SIPR JWIC centric, when I break those ties, I now don't have that alerting feature anymore. Or I'm manually doing it. Now I'm back to the old model of doing business. That doesn't help me. In this environment, as dynamic as it is, as quickly as it moves, as much as D&D is sitting out there, Inception sitting out there, we gotta have a better way of doing it.
So the question I would offer, you already gave AMRC or the data centers that are benefiting from the work that you're doing. This is great work, but obviously they have similar problems. The commission area has similar problems. So are you able to share, and are they doing similar things?
Similar things. Soon, we have 2 other projects in the queue that are funded right now, and we're going to be announcing some requests for proposals soon. Their problems are not the same as counter-narcotics.
Right.
They're very different. And that's part of the reason why we're approaching the new business model as we are.
So you have the mindset that the methodology that you're using in this particular case with this set of problems that you're working cannot be applied to
our strategic objective is to trace synthetic opioids from nature to needle. It's a supply chain problem.
That's a
I could have-
data specific,
Yes. Data specific thing. But what I understood was your question was about methodology.
right? In other words, the infrastructure, the bits and pieces that are involved in crunching through the data to get to an insight.
I think it is cross-applicable.
Data, right?
Yeah, I think it is cross-applicable. And I think we have had folks that have said they want to do something similar. But the question I would ask for that mission partner is it appropriate to do exactly what we did? Or is it appropriate to try something a little bit different?
It would have to be based on a very specific experiment with a model.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So what I am frustrated by is that my counterparts will say, well, AI this and AI that, like it's a hammer, right?
Yes.
They'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. Right? Well, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? So our nuance is, well, that could be a screw, that could be a nut, a wing nut, as a nut, right? And so, you're not supposed to agree to that, thank you for that. So by nuancing a little bit, unpackaging that mission question first,
Yes.
before we go after the tool, that's what I want to achieve.
So I'm just curious, are you guys running these systems through like a risk management framework? And like that, you having to assess, make sure that they're data.
You're saying in the program or the specific program? Like in the program I'm describing for the future or the program we do now? The one we do now, yes, absolutely. For all the other ones, they're still on whiteboards. Well, some of them are.
So who does, are you guys, DIA doing the assessment?
We have, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a trick question there? Somebody else do it?
I was waiting for Vince to jump in.
There is a trick question, but no, he kind of gave it out. So from a risk management framework, for us, that we want to basically buy into your private users, so we're going to need to come with ATO and all that things that it doesn't affect our operations.
Right.
So we're looking for your RP.
See, I cut around that. We're done. We're done with Julie's. We're gonna use it. Now, so one of the things, I need it, don't cut it. So one of the things that gets us excited about programs like this is that by focusing on the open domain, we can start to refine more of what we're really looking for, right? There are exquisite capabilities that we need to exploit secrets, as opposed to stuff. I've seen requirements that are things like, I want to know what's going on in China. Who doesn't? Everybody does. It is not helpful for our folks downrange to collect on that requirement. It should come off the books immediately, but it's still sitting there. Okay. So what SABLE SPEAR ends up doing for us is to say, well, here's everything we know on this particular question. Now let's figure out what we don't know. Sorry.
Throwing this out there, so how are the parameters for the question
So, how the parameter what?
Well, how's the question formulated if you don't know what you don't know? How do you know how to look for it? Because it could be in something about China. I mean, it could be something as simple as, well, the wall is built this way, but then the secret could be in the ingredients or whatever.
Yes.
So how do you know?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So for the kinds of questions that we try to answer with this particular question, it's a data correlation problem. So it's more of a mystery and less of an enigma. So if we were looking at, a question that was trying to discern how many underground facilities are there in the world, well, that's probably an enigma because there's probably a lot of people trying to hide what they're trying to do. Not to say that in the opioid crisis we don't have the same problem. There are people trying to hide what they're trying to do, but they still won't be found. So this drives back to the key question that we are trying to get mission to understand. And it's that we don't just ask any question and get answered by AI. It has to be something refined and addressable by it, right? And I'll use a transportation analogy. I need to do some scuba diving. Well, what car do I buy? What are you talking about? You're going to drive it off the pier? Put it right in the water? Doesn't make any sense. But those are the kinds of things that come to us. You do that. What does anybody else? right? I need to go scuba dive. What plane do I buy? What are you talking about? Well, I have to buy one of these planes. It doesn't help you, right?
I guess I'm just going back to what Dave was saying, trying to understand how the tools can be applied to other problem sets and other models. Because it sounds as though these tools are very powerful, leveraging several clouds. So it seems as though they can be applied to different analytics, different problem sets, regardless of what they are.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to assess, is this starting with the model, and then from there, the application. I just don't have any semblance of that.
So I'm going to lean on Linwood a little bit on this, because I don't know if we're simpatico on this, so I don't know if he's going to agree or not. I think we always lead with the mission question and the model. I think if we go any other route, then we're not getting there. AI is a discipline, is what it comes down to, right? And I am still learning about everything. I think we will be forever. And as we move forward in understanding the discipline of it, there are nuances to the technicals, and then there's straight up art that you could not divine just by sitting there and doing it. You have to know the data in and out. You have to know how it behaves. You have to know how to instruct the machine to do those things, in my experience. I'm going to give the mic to Linwood and see if he wants to amplify.
So based on everything that he's describing, in terms of the tools and the methodology and the technology that he's using to solve that problem, yes. I mean, the simple answer is yes, it will apply to any other problem set, but it's going to require some tweaking, because essentially what he's doing is he's identifying a pattern and then making a decision on that pattern based on internal rules that they've established. And I think it would just require defining the pattern that you are looking for in the new problem set, and then defining like what is the classifier or that you're trying to answer. What's the right answer, so to speak. So I think yes, it applies to any other problem.
I think where we'll start to do something a little bit more different and exciting is we have, if anyone's familiar with technology readiness levels, there's a scale, there's up to 9, 0. Our office is in charge of basic research into these spaces. So that can be physics, chemistry, whatever it is. And AI is one of those pieces of the portfolio I direct. So as we think about an emerging technology in AI that may not exist, our office is in charge of making that investment, right? So if anyone were to come to us and say, here's a proposal to do, I have no idea. I have no idea. Natural language translation that's 100%. 100%. Okay. Tough. Extremely tough. We're going to test it. We're going to test it. We're going to see if you can actually do it. And we're going to test it against standards we have, standards that are out in the academic sector, standards that we get from other vendors. We're going to do that. And if you can run with everybody else, let's do it. Now, we may be talking about an investment opportunity that's like TRL level 2. We're going to invest to bring you up to at least a 5 so we can start to actually run it against mission. And that's not a trivial decision, because lives could be on the line for that kind of decision based on the mission agreement. So, but that's what we're here to do. Take some risks and deliver value. Look in the back.
How user-friendly is this tool for analysts?
Depends on the user. Are you friendly with the machine? It'll be friendly to you. How user-friendly? Can you say a little more?
For the analysts in your shop, what kind of experiences are they bringing in, and how are they able to adjust? Have people been able to come on board to this quickly? And is that vague?
Yeah. So to be blunt, the first UI we got, user interface, was not good. Like went at all, and it showed just some basic correlations that we could use. So we just came back for a week in Palo Alto trying to get them to make getting them to make those adjustments. But it's an informed question, because I think when we have technologies we deliver without involving the user at the front end, we just deliver it. Here it is. But was it Jack this morning? He talked about, like, you ordered pizza. No, you ordered a beer and you got pizza, right? That's exactly right. That's exactly what happens. Haven't been on the receiver side of that. So I've made it a focus area to be sure we include the analysts at the very beginning. And we spent a lot of time out west just trying to take what they would say and translate those into requirements that someone could understand. And spanning that gap is hard. If anyone's ever done it. Yeah. Sorry.
Just got one quick follow-up. How many people are currently in your program, like employees? When did you start? When did you start specifically?
We've been doing this for about a year.
1 year.
When you talk contract accidents and so forth, the actual level of effort kicked off is about 4 months.
And how many people would you describe as the footprint of this program?
Just on this question?
Yeah.
So it's 6 FTEs on both ends. So 6 FTEs on the government side and on the contractor side. So that's it's a good question, because if it ended up being that we could have done it with fewer people on the government side, I might have a different business proposition. Right? So I've had fewer government people taking a little bit longer to do it. Okay? So because I have fewer people, get more people, I can do better. My supposition is that I could throw millions of people at this problem, I would not get there from here.
Just curious, are you able to pull from social media stuff and things like the Lyft and Uber side? I've worked with some task force before, and I know a lot of people are trafficking, using those apps and stuff like that. You can call it, kind of shows up, and that's how they're moving stuff after midnight locally, local stuff. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Just a couple pounds or whatever. But just curious, have you guys tied into that to kind of watch those type of trends?
If it's publicly available, we collect it. That kind of data about like rider apps and that sort of thing, you have to buy that. It's expensive. We have looked at it. It's very, very expensive because it's not oriented for us. It's oriented for folks that are trying to figure out ways to sell other stuff.
Right. Exactly. So I didn't know if, Facebook in the past has not been forthcoming on wanting to share their stuff with law enforcement, like that users' privacy or whatever.
Right.
Because they sell a lot of stuff through that, and they're using Snapchat and everything. I know one of the big trafficking things now is the best way to do stuff. You have a provider of the flight on tonight, and cops are pulling you over. They're sitting on the way to pick up the gun or something.
Right, true.
I'm just curious if you guys are watching those trends.
Oh, many sources.
Yeah.
Many sources apply. Many sources.
Catch-all answer.
Awesome. Oh, how about that? Feels like Miller time. Yeah? Well, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Thank you for your questions.